if you want to pull up the slides. Fantastic. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you so much for joining us for the Community Working Group orientation for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program this evening. We're so appreciative of your time and grateful that you've chosen to invest in this important program in this specific way. My name is Katie Bellaconi, and I have the honor of leading the community engagement team for the IBR program. You'll notice a lot of folks in attendance at this orientation. Everyone in attendance is either a participant on one of our 4 community working groups or is staff supporting one or more of the groups. Members of the public may be watching this meeting as it is being live streamed on YouTube. They also may watch the recordings of community working group meetings at a later date. You can go to the next slide. With that, let's go ahead and take care of some general housekeeping. We're providing closed captioning in both English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link found at https://www.streamtext.net/event=IBR to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. Next slide. To access closed captioning, you'll want to go to the menu of options you see at the bottom middle of your screen. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of your screen, then click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Next slide. A few other things to note if you are participating in the meeting by Zoom today. ASL interpretation is available. Please let us know in the chat if you would like this service to be provided in your breakout session. Please join audio by either phone or computer, not both. If you have joined by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. After you are invited to speak, dial *6 to unmute yourself. If you experience technical difficulties, please utilize the chat feature or contact program staff at 360-329-6744. If you do use the chat feature, please note that only program staff will be able to see your question or comment. Please also limit your chat to technical or accessibility questions. Next slide. Now that we have some of the meeting logistics out of the way, let's officially get started. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. We are excited to have this chance to speak with you and officially welcome you to participate on one of the program's community working groups. As someone who's been intimately involved in identifying interested and qualified community members to serve on these groups, I can confidently say that the diversity of perspectives and passion from the participants we've identified to be involved in this process is truly humbling. During this orientation, we are going to cover the high-level role of each community working group, hear introductions from the staff team that is supporting this effort, and talk about the way in which we want to interface with each other in our community working group meetings. We will cover general program information to help ensure all community working group participants are starting from a similar level of program understanding in terms of background, context, and future work. Additionally, one of our urban designers will provide a broader context regarding how the program fits within the regional framework in terms of bi-state connectivity and placemaking opportunities. Lastly, we'll separate into breakout rooms by distinct community working groups, and you'll get a chance to meet your fellow community working group participants and hear a little bit more about what you can expect to discuss at your upcoming meetings. This will also be a time where you can ask any questions you may have. Next slide. But really, our goal for this session is for you to become familiar with the other individuals who are part of the community working group process, for you to feel comfortable and included, for you to better understand the broader context of the program and the historical and environmental context of the program, for you to understand how the program plans to identify an IBR solution and what your role is in the process, including the community working group framework, schedule, and work plan. Next slide. At this time, I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce key staff members supporting the community working group process. Let's start with hearing briefly from our group facilitators. Please introduce yourself and which group you will be facilitating. Sam, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Sam Imperati and I will be facilitating the Hayden Island Marine Drive Work Group. Pleasure to meet you all and look forward to our breakout sessions.
Thanks, Sam. Monica?
Hi, good afternoon all. I am Monica Santos Panaccio, and I will be facilitating the Downtown Vancouver Working Group. And likewise, I'm excited to get to meet everybody and love seeing some familiar faces here too.
Thank you, Monica. And last but not least, Anita.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name's Anita Yap, and I will be facilitating two working groups. One is the active transportation, and the other one is the multimodal commuter group. And I want to thank you all for participating. This is an important project, and I look forward to getting to know you better and working with you.
Thank you, Anita. Now let's meet our IBR technical leads. Again, your name, your role, and what groups you plan to be most involved with. Let's start with Derek.
Hi, Derek Abe. I am with the urban design team, and I'll be involved with many of the active transportation discussions.
Is Katie also in attendance?
Katie is planning to join a little bit later,
Okay.
but yeah.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Ryan, are you here?
Yes, Ryan LaProuse. I'm the transportation planning lead for the program. I will be supporting the Downtown Vancouver Working Group, the Hayden Island Marine Drive Working Group, and the Multimodal Commuter Working Group.
Fantastic. Brad?
Hello, Brad Phillips with the IBR program. I'm leading the Highway Civil Roadway Design team, and I will be supporting the Hayden Island Marine Drive and the Downtown Vancouver groups.
Thanks, Brad. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Bennett, Urban Design Technical Lead, and I will be supporting Downtown Vancouver and Hayden Island Marine Drive.
Thank you. What about Vicki or Kelly?
Hi, I'm Vicki Smith. I'm the transit lead on the project, and I will be supporting the Downtown Vancouver group and the Hayden Island Marine Drive, as well as the multimodal commuter group. So look forward to working with you.
Thank you, guys. In addition to those folks, we have members from almost all of our program partners in attendance, and they will continue to be highly involved in these meetings as so much of the IBR program overlaps with work and plans, both occurring within these jurisdictions and being led by these agencies. Our 8 program partners include CTRAN and TriMet, the City of Portland and the City of Vancouver, the Port of Vancouver and Port of Portland, and our MPOs, which are Metro and RTC. And lastly, we have many other IBR staff from our equity team, communications team, and leadership who are excited to be part of this process. Next slide. All of you participating on one of the community working groups have had conversations with program staff at this point about what it means to participate in this process, but I did want to take a few minutes and call out a few of the high points of the community working group framework that was established prior to us identifying appropriate representatives. Most of us probably know that there are 4 different community working groups being launched currently. We have combined the orientation with all groups in attendance, but future meetings will be held separately. The 4 groups were formed to be topic specific based on 4 key elements of the program. We have the Hayden Island Marine Drive Community Working Group, the Downtown Vancouver Community Working Group, the Active Transportation Community Working Group, and the Multimodal Commuter Working Group. Participants on each of the groups include both at-large community members and stakeholders that were selected to represent a specific organization or perspective. We have placed between 1 and 3 community advisory group members on each of the community working groups to provide a direct linkage to relay broader community feedback regarding specific program areas directly to the program advisory group members. Each community advisory group, each community working group will meet twice before the end of the calendar year. You'll see the specific calendar dates later in the orientation today. The future meeting dates are also listed on the bottom of the orientation agenda you received prior to this meeting. Lastly, I will clarify that these working groups are not to take the place of the program's 2 community advisory groups or broader community engagement opportunities that we provide on an ongoing basis. But instead, our intention is for a small set of community members to provide really specific feedback on a narrow set of questions and options that are being considered by program staff currently. Next slide. As I mentioned, there are 4 topic-specific community working groups. From a high level, each of the groups will be providing feedback on the following. For the active transportation group, participants will provide feedback on the design of walking, biking, and rolling elements across the bridge and its connection points. The Downtown Vancouver group will provide insight on the transit and highway connection to the interstate bridge, including potential alternatives and design options. Similarly, the Hayden Island Marine Drive group will provide feedback on Hayden Island and Marine Drive interchanges and connections to the interstate bridge, including potential alternatives and design options. And the Multimodal Commuter Group is being asked to provide feedback on the bridge user experience from a commuter perspective, whether it's commuting across the bridge via transit, car, bike, or rolling. Again, we'll talk a little bit later in the orientation about the specific meeting topics that might be covered at each of your upcoming meetings. Next slide. Next, we're going to take a couple of minutes and talk about the meeting agreements we are asking all community working group participants to adhere to as they engage in this process and participate in meetings and communication with each other. This slide lists all of the meeting agreements we want community working group participants to embrace, and I'll talk about them in a bit more detail in the next few slides. Next slide. Put relationships first, work to build community and trust with awareness of power dynamics, listen to understand, not reply, be inclusive. Next slide. Keep focused on our common goal. We care deeply about the participants on our community working groups, especially participants who are directly impacted by racism. Centering equity in the IBR program includes emphasizing our processes to create equitable outcomes. We engage the community by elevating voices of historically marginalized communities. Next slide. Notice the power dynamics in the room. Be aware of how you are using your privilege from taking up too much emotional and airtime space or disengaging. We want to see you. Please keep your video on. If your question or comment has already been made, no need to repeat it. Be present and engaged. Create a space for multiple truths and norms. Speak your truth and seek understanding of truths that differ from yours with awareness of power dynamics. Listen for understanding and different perspectives. Be kind and brave. Remember relationships first. Work to be explicit with your language about race, class, gender, and immigration. Be clear in your language. Be curious. Ask questions before making assumptions. Practice examining racially biased systems and processes. Individual actions are important, and systems are what are left after all the people in this room leave. Processes for mega transportation projects have existed for a long time. This program is focused on processes and outcomes. It is all of our job collectively to make the program a reflection of this community's values. Next slide. Look for learning. Show what you're learning, not what you already know. Avoid playing devil's advocate. The devil has enough advocates. Adopt a growth mindset. Seek data to inform decision making. Next slide. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Kellyanne Amico, who is the program's Public Information Officer and would like to take a few minutes to talk to you about the program's media protocol.
All right, thank you, Katie. And thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to talk about media for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Next slide, please. So, with your involvement in the program, it is very possible that people in the news media will call you. And here is a general protocol for responding to media queries. When the media calls, get their name, phone number, and email address, find out the name of the news outlet, and then please feel free to share that information with me. My email address is on this slide, kellyanne.amico@interstatebridge.org. A few tips about the reporters. Keep in mind that reporters, they're not your enemy, they're not your friend. They may seem like one or the other, but the fact is that they're just trying to do their job. They are typically always on a deadline and the constant stress of getting the story. So their focus is on getting the story, sound bites, or quotes. They may seem negative at times, and that's just because they deal with good news and bad news and news of all sorts. Don't take it personally. The overarching message, though, that I want to give to you is that as a volunteer for the program, you're not a spokesperson. So if you could please be sure to refer any program specific queries to me, I'd sure appreciate it. Otherwise, it's really important to make it clear that you're a volunteer and your opinions are your own. So when it comes to news, there are 3 C's there are many C's of news, but these are the ones that we like to hone in on for this program: consequential, controversial, and curious. And I think the program itself speaks for what these 3 C's mean. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, as a volunteer, for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, you are not the spokesperson. Your opinions are your own. But of course, please feel free to talk to anyone who contacts you with the caveat that your opinions are your own. So in an interview situation, I encourage you to listen to what the reporter is asking. Take your time to respond to a question. Never feel rushed. It's always just fine to really take the time to think about it. If you don't understand what the question is, please feel free to ask them to rephrase the question. And if it's a recorded interview, whether it's audio or video, please always feel free to say, can I try that again? And in most cases, they're going to want to capture the best audio or video, and they shouldn't have a problem at all with you getting another try at the answer. Always be yourself, be honest, refrain from speculating, debating, or interrupting in conversation. Next slide, please. Social media. You may have observed that we're on a few platforms now. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We just launched our LinkedIn profile, and our sharp shooting group of interns this year has helped us spearhead our TikTok account. So you can find us in any number of places. So please follow us. And when it comes to your involvement with regard to social media, keep in mind that anything that you share with regard to the program is, once again, your views are your own, and please make it clear that they do not necessarily reflect the views of the IBR program. Always be respectful. Social media can tend to be a rabbit hole, and so we prefer to take the high road, and we encourage you to do so too. So be respectful of others' opinions, avoid engaging in, no-win debate. Accuracy, please be sure, if you do post information about the program, with the caveat that your opinions are your own, be sure your facts are accurate. Avoid assumptions, predictions, or hearsay. And if you post, again, note that you're a volunteer, and as part of that, you can also encourage people to view the live streams of these of your meetings. And confidentiality is one of those tricky things when it comes to these kinds of settings with social media. So everything in public meetings is public information, but offline conversations and those with your volunteer peers is private. So please try to kind of keep that line. Those are the general thoughts on media and social media. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, kellyann.amico@interstatebridge.org. All right, my part is finished. Thank you so much for letting me attend today.
Thank you, Kellyann. I now am pleased to introduce Fabiola and Alex, who will lead you through some background and context slides regarding our program.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Fabiola Casas, and have been working with the IBR staff, working really closely with Katie and the really great team that has brought us all together today to do this really important work. And so thank you for being here with us tonight. And I hope that the information will really be helpful as you think about how you want to contribute and in the working groups and what information you need to do so. I will mention that we do have quite a bit of information in this section of our program tonight. And so I encourage folks to have something to take notes with, whether that's a pen or pencil or typing some notes out. Make note of any questions that come up as we go through this information. We will be having that breakout meeting time, and that will be a great time to ask those questions, ask for clarifications or any additional information that you're hoping to get. And with that, I'm gonna go on to the next slide and do a little storytelling here. So almost 20 years ago, regional leaders identified the need to address the I-5 corridor, including the interstate bridge, through previous bi-state long-range planning studies. It was in 2004 that Washington and Oregon Departments of Transportation formed the joint Columbia River Crossing Project, also known as CRC. Some of you may have been involved with that, and so know that through the work continued through 2005 to 2014. We coordinated with partners to study alternatives, identified a preferred alternative, completed the environmental process, and successfully received a federal record of decision in December of 2011. The record of decision is essentially the federal government's go ahead with the project, and what some of the key pieces that were identified through this process leading up to the record of decision is also known as the locally preferred alternative, or LPA. And the LPA includes key components which we are building off of. And there have been some changes since then, but I wanted to share some of the key components that were brought up during the previous planning process. Those include the replacement of the I-5 bridge, 3 standard through lanes and 2 auxiliary lanes, improvements to closely spaced highway interchanges, light rail extension to Clark College, pedestrian and bicycle facility improvements. And so it was unfortunate in 2014 when the project did not secure adequate state funding to advance the construction, and the project was discontinued. But it's all of this work that we're building off of in the IBI program that we're working on now. So next slide. The IBR program was initiated in November 2019 by both governors of Oregon and Washington signing a bi-state memorandum of intent, essentially jumpstarting the program shortly after our program administrator, Greg Johnson, was hired and has been leading our efforts since. He's been leading a collaborative process, which has included a bi-state legislative committee, which is providing oversight and guidance to shape the work. I'll move back really quickly to the second point, which shares that $80 million in combined funding were dedicated by both states in May of this year. So jointly, we have all of these funds, we have these agreements, and again, we're working really closely with 8 other bi-state partner agencies. Katie mentioned that many of our partners have representatives with us here tonight. Not everyone is represented, but all of them include TriMet, CTRAN, Oregon Metro, Southwest Washington Regional Transportation Council, the City of Portland, the City of Vancouver, the Port of Portland, and the Port of Vancouver. Next slide. So here's a timeline which has a lot of details. We're going to be breaking it down by section so that hopefully it makes some sense to you. We're going to focus on the top part where you see 3 sections: where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So I spoke to prior planning efforts that happened between 2004 and 2014. In 2019, we had our program launch, and through 2020, we have been doing a lot of engagement with the community, doing a lot of internal work to establish our program's purpose, our values, our priorities, and this is overlapping with our really intensive planning session, which we're in the middle of. And this is all leading into a section of our work, which will be focused around our environmental review work, and we'll be getting some more information about what that looks like. Right now, we are in the middle of planning, moving to identifying an IBR solution. And you'll see that middle bar between the activities that we're engaged in our timeline. You'll see community engagement there. And this is just highlighting that at the core of what we're doing is engaging with partners and stakeholders and the community at large in various ways. And all of that is helping inform how our activities are unfolding. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that has looked like for us in the last few months. So next slide. All right, so our purpose and need was identified in this beginning part of our program work through community outreach. We learned that the 6 previously identified transportation problems still exist and are a top priority to address for this region. And you'll see those problems as congestion and reliability, earthquake vulnerability, and safety concerns. Those were our top 3 that we identified through our community engagement work. And the other 3 include inadequate bicycle and pedestrian facilities, impaired freight movement, and limited public transportation. In addition to these to these high concerns that we have as a region related to the IBR program, we also identified that equity and climate are considerations that are really important to our community. And so in order to have some structure around what that means, I'll be sharing some frameworks in just a bit. Before we move there, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our community values and priorities on the next slide. We had surveys go out earlier this year, and we compiled a lot of information. Survey participants were asked to identify opportunities and benefits for a community to share and to share values that are most important to them. They were asked to select the top 3 priorities within each within each of these values that were presented. And as I read off the different values, I want to encourage everybody to think about what are some of the values that resonate most with you as we go into this work. What are some of the values that you really want to center your work around? So I'm just going to read them off and just be thinking about that. The first one, commitment to equity, having a strong focus on transportation for low-income travelers, people with disabilities, and non-drivers, minimizing impacts on neighboring communities. The second one, environment, protect fish, wildlife, and associated habitats, protect water quality. The next one, safety and reliability, less time sitting in traffic, vehicle, or transit, make sure the bridge is earthquake ready. The next value, cost and funding, utilize previous planning work to maximize past investments and support efficient decision-making. Limit funding options such as tolling that will directly impact users. The next one, transit and multimodal. Extend LRT across the bridge. Provide public transit options that are direct routes between Portland and Vancouver, Clark County. And the last one that we have here are the economy and community. Prioritize future generations' transportation needs and priorities. Support the efficient movement of goods, services along the coast. So these are all going to be guiding our work in different ways. They all mean different things to different people, and we do hope that that these are brought into your conversations as we engage in some decision making together. So the next slide has some information, as I mentioned before, about some tools that we've been developing to help guide our decision making process. And those are our equity and climate frameworks. These frameworks are tools that are in the works right now, because as I mentioned on our timeline, we're still in our planning process, and we've been doing a lot of really hard work to make sure that these are tools that are useful and that will be adaptable throughout the life of our program. These frameworks will be used to consider decisions throughout the design and construction process. Some of the specific ways that they'll be used is around screening criteria as we evaluate design options, when we think about and consider performance measures, when we talk about design and construction specifications, considerations around letters of agreement, and just generally thinking about our program commitments and how we can enhance community benefits. And so I'm going to go a little bit more into detail about what is included in the equity framework next. All right, awesome. You see these 4 main pieces that make up the equity framework. The first one is having a really clear program equity definition. What does equity mean in the context of IBR? The word equity can mean a lot of different things to different people. So we wanted to be as clear as possible. We worked with our equity advisory group to develop a definition that was created in collaboration and adopted formally by our program administrator. And I'll be sharing that after this slide. But next is our equity objectives. What is it exactly that we want to achieve? The next section on the bottom left are measures of success. What do we want to measure and how will we measure it? We want to make sure that that we have something that is guiding in a very tangible way our successes. Lastly, we want to make sure that our equity framework is something that is actionable, that we consider it as we develop our community engagement strategies, our design process, our construction specifications, and different activities that will be meaningful in the impact that we're having in our community. So next slide. Our equity definition. The equity advisory group came to defining equity in both process and outcomes. Process equity means that the program prioritizes access, influence, and decision-making power for marginalized and underserved communities throughout the program in establishing objectives, design, implementation, and evaluation of success. Outcome equity is the result of successful process equity and is demonstrated by tangible transportation and economic benefits for marginalized and underserved communities. The next slide lays out more specifically what we mean when we talk about marginalized and underserved communities. And those are defined as those who experience or have experienced discrimination and exclusion based on identity. And those identities include BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, communities with limited English proficiency, also sometimes referred to as LEP, persons with lower income, houseless individuals and families, immigrants and refugees, young people, and older adults. So together, process equity and outcome equity will contribute to addressing the impacts in removing long-standing injustices experienced by these communities within our region. And we really are trying to ground this work in issues that are connected to our region specifically. All right, well, next slide. So here you see an image that is titled the IBR Climate Framework. Again, I want to emphasize that both the equity framework and the climate framework are being worked on as we speak. There are a lot of people that are putting a lot of thought around how the frameworks are being developed and how they will be used. The climate framework really focuses on minimizing impact around climate impacts. So the first one is around transportation options, construction, and operations, and additionally has a focus on climate resilience. So making sure that we're considering environmental change and behavior change and how that might influence the ways that we're making decisions. And in addition to these core considerations, we're also going to be looking at the equity nexus or implications of climate choices. And while our focus is on avoiding impacts, there may be an occasion where we evaluate offsets. So we want to make sure that we bring this full toolbox to bear. So you can see that the equity framework and the climate framework will be working together and hopefully creating a supportive frame for you all to think about how, or to know how we are being guided in our decision making. All right, that is it for my portion. The next slide has the timeline again. And I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Alex, to talk a little bit more specifically about the technical piece that is outlined here. And so thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it on to Alex.
Thank you, Fabiola. So Fabiola walked us through a lot of what is happening at the community engagement level with our equity framework, our climate framework, but there's so much work that we're doing as well on the technical side so that we can continue to move this program forward. Community engagement is a key component to that as it helps us move the technical portion forward. But I wanted to just walk you through for a minute or two some really technical information that shows the progression that we're going to take between 2021 and 2022 when we will enter the environmental process. So please bear with me. In our orientation on Monday, I think Katie warned everyone to please take some notes and to write down questions if you have them. This presentation will be available and distributed afterwards, but if you have any questions, please write them down for your breakout groups. So right now, we are identifying design options. This is identifying different components or areas that we're going to look at to continue to develop design options. We're also defining screening criteria. Screening criteria are questions and measures that are going to help us evaluate these different design options so that we can move one design forward. By the end of October, we will have the screening criteria and design options refined and finalized so that we can do the hard work in November and December of going through design option by design option and metric by metric and actually score each of the design options to see how they perform against each other using all of the data that we collected for the previous project and continue to collect now. So the goal is to have a recommendation by the end of December or by the beginning of the new year so that we can then work to tie all of these different components together into one IBR solution that we can then move through the environmental process. So next slide, please. When we think about what these design options are, because that's a little bit vague when I describe it using a timeline, there are 4 crucial areas of design that we're going to be looking at now that are going to be different from previous designs. So there are interchange improvements, transit options, the replacement bridge itself, and active transportation. And these are all areas in which we're studying one or many different design options. The difficult thing is that then we look at all of these design options and we have to weave them all back in together into one single IBR solution. So how do we choose where we need to study the design options and why? Next slide, please. We are going to respond to changes in the physical environment and context. We are going to develop design options to address these changes. We are going to use data and analysis to evaluate design options. We're going to continue to coordinate with our partners, some of whom are on this call, and ESG. We are going to engage advisory groups like you and the community, and we're going to then narrow down those design options in the areas we just highlighted to create a single solution for the environmental process, which will start in mid-2022. So again, a lot of the changes that we're looking at are the ones that might cause us to change design from last time. Next slide, please. So what are changes? So we can have contextual or physical changes. So we can go through a few of these changes that might spur us to change design. So regional, state, and local equity policies and priorities, regional, state, and local climate goals and priorities, developments in downtown Vancouver and Hayden Island, Oregon tolling congestion pricing, demographics, COVID-19 impacts on transportation, environmental regulations, expanded transit opportunities, like the changes that CTRAN and TriMet have made since the previous study, past and updated regional transportation plans, updates to FAA requirements, which could impact the height of the bridge, land use policies, plan development and zoning changes, federal transit funding requirements, and changes in freight and industrial activity. And just to be clear, these changes are changes that have taken place since the previous LPA that Fabiola described was produced in 2013. So in the intervening 8 years, these are some of the changes that might necessitate us to change design options. So the process is really to design or to develop design options to address these changes. Again, this is a complicated process and it involves weaving everything together. Next slide, please. So this is all a little bit abstract at this point, and because we're in the middle of the process, we can't show you exactly how we're doing it because we are still figuring it out right now. So what I'm going to do here is walk you through an example, some of which is taken from the IBR program because we have done it, and some of which is taken from a different project because we haven't developed it yet. That is still on the docket for November and December. So here you'll look and you'll see, again, these major decisions that we saw. This is for the IBR program. And some of those are transit options, the roadway, which includes those interchange improvements, and active transportation. So these are all working groups that you might be working on in your upcoming work. I just said work like 18 times, sorry. So for the major decisions for the roadway, we need to decide the interchange locations and layout, the limits of local street improvements, the bridge configuration and height, and the number of auxiliary lanes. And it's really important to note that these are major decisions that we need to make before the environmental review process. There are still going to be so many different decisions that are going to continue to be made until we go to construction in 2025. A lot of those have to do with the look and feel of the facilities and how you will use them. But these are some of the major design options that we need to have decided by spring of 2022. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run you through really quickly the Hayden Island interchange option example. So we are looking now at 3 different categories of design options: a full interchange, a partial interchange, or no interchange. All of these different options have benefits and drawbacks, and it's our job during this screening process to try to evaluate those and objectively determine which will be best for the program and which will be best when combined with all of the other options, especially the transit. Next slide, please. So the first one is more or less what you'll see now. That's what we have. But this is what we will have by the end of October so that we can then go into a detailed screening process. This is an example from the design options for Hayden Island and Marine Drive from the previous project. So this is not the design from this project. This is not necessarily what any of the designs that move forward at the end of October are going to be, but this is what you'll have, the level of detail that we'll have in order to really evaluate which one is going to work best for the program. Next slide, please. So once we have those more detailed drawings, and those are still very preliminary design, it's still at less than 5% design, which means that we still have 95% of the design still to do in the future after October. So we're still at the very germination stage, but we will have enough to make a matrix like this, which includes our evaluation criteria, so our screening criteria, and the measurements that we're going to use to evaluate it, and then the design options and a little description of how they score. So if you look at this, the first column to the left are the evaluation criteria. So land use and economic development. How are we going to measure that? So the 2 measures they have here are consistency with local comprehensive plans, sub-area plans, and planned land uses, and the ability to support and enhance transit-oriented development and redevelopment in station areas. The two columns to the right are the two different options that are screened in this process. And I didn't say at the beginning, but this is really, really important to know. This screening matrix is from a completely different project. We do not have this information yet. We are bringing you into the process as we do it, and we want to show you how it's going to happen, but we're not going to have a document like this until the end of December. So once we evaluate all of the different options here using all of these different screening criteria, we can then work together to try to determine which options are higher performing in which areas and which are lower performing. That's going to allow us to make a technical recommendation on what should move forward. Next slide, please. So the screening criteria we saw in the previous slide were from a different project, but here we have some broad categories of screening criteria that we are going to use on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And these are, again, the broad categories. So these aren't necessarily the individual questions we are going to ask or the ways that we're going to measure them. So the categories of screening criteria are equity, climate, the efficient movement of people and goods, environment and community health, cost, constructability, and structural safety. So these screening criteria have been developed based on the vision and values and purpose and need that were earlier identified, as well as these policy changes or renewed focus on equity and climate. So that's how these screening criteria were made. And so we have to look, how does each design option measure up when it comes to one of our top priorities? So the screening criteria are the most useful when they identify the differences among design options. So if we ask a question about the efficient movement of people and goods, and we have 5 design options, and we have the exact same response for each of the 5 options, that's not a particularly helpful criterion because that is not going to help us move forward. The decisions about which option is selected will be based on the trade-offs that are differentiated among the screening criteria. So again, we're going to be looking at these benefits and drawbacks, and there may be areas in which a design option performs really well, but it performs really poorly in other areas. And that's when we're going to have to evaluate what can we live with and what can we not live with, and then move on to our recommendation. Next slide. So once all of that is done and we have woven together one IBR solution that includes things like the interchange layouts and the number of auxiliary lanes and the transit system, which includes the mode and the stations and the parking rides, we're going to submit that for the environmental review process. The National Environmental Policy Act, which is NEPA, and you will probably hear that acronym a lot. This process involves a data-driven analysis of the program's impact on the environment. So we're going to take that very, very primitive design that we have, and then we're going to put it through a really rigorous process that assesses what does this bridge or what does this solution do to the environment. The environmental study from the prior project will be leveraged to inform all of our program work. But given the physical and contextual changes within the program area in the last decade, we're probably going to need a new EIS. Again, a supplemental EIS will provide an in-depth analysis of the elements of the IBR program solution that respond to changes since the prior study and NEPA decision and look at those impacts. Resulting changes to previously identified benefits and impacts to natural, cultural, and human environment will be documented. Design refinements, benefits, and impacts will be evaluated through equity and climate lenses. And the IBR program will continue to include mitigation commitments to reduce, minimize, or avoid potential impacts. And it's really important to know that throughout this environmental process, which is going to take us into 2024, community engagement and looking at the entire program from equity and climate lenses is going to be a top priority. And not only is it going to be our top priority, but it is also required by NEPA. Next slide, please. So at the end of that process, once we have drafted everything and we have put it through the environmental review process in 2023 and 2024, we will have developed a new locally preferred alternative, which can then go into construction in 2025. So again, we are at the very beginning phases where we're developing a very preliminary design and evaluating it objectively using screening criteria based on vision and values. And then we have a long time to go to provide input, to look at different design options in a different light, to make decisions beyond those major ones that we just went over. And I think that that is all for me. And I'll hand it over to Tom, who has always much prettier slides. And so thank you. And I'm sorry it is so dense.
All right, thank you, Alex. So I'm going to talk about community context, and what this section really is kind of setting the stage to help, or for you to help us understand your communities and the important places that this project touches. And I'll be doing that through this presentation. There'll be a series of questions for you to consider for the upcoming meetings where we'll be getting your input. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And quickly, we'll just touch on the big picture, which was mentioned earlier. This shows that the IBR project is a piece of a much larger I-5 link that connects major cities across the West Coast in both the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Next slide, please. And along that corridor, our region is really unique. This project encompasses 2 states, 2 cities, 1 island, and a river that's both a working river from an industrial and commerce standpoint, as well as a great natural resource. Next slide, please. And part of that resource of the river is also the culturally significant historic sites that are along it. So that's on both sides of the river, both for Vancouver and Portland as well. Next slide. And so some of those cultural resources are both Native American, the Delta Park powwow encampment that happens on the Portland side. Next slide, please. And the annual canoe journey that's typically launched from the Vancouver side as well on the river. Next slide, please. And then other important cultural considerations that have historic significance are the Vanport flood, which was a major event that happened in this area and caused the displacement of the Vanport community. Next slide, please. And the site of the current Expo Center, where the Portland Assembly Center was located, where during World War II, Japanese Americans were interned. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, I'll talk about how we kind of put all these different layers together to kind of look at creating an integrated urban tapestry for all these different pieces. And so as we go through this, one of the things that would be great for you to think about is how can this program better integrate and support the visions of both the places and communities that we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So first, within the project area, we've got really a rich tapestry of both places and destinations. There's regional destinations such as downtown Vancouver and Hayden Island on both sides of the river. They're surrounded by a lot of neighborhoods and some culturally significant historic sites, which I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. And the proximity of those really makes for a rich kind of live, work, and play environment with all of these kind of daily functions very close to one another and close to the neighborhoods that surround them. Next slide, please. But one of the issues that we need to address is how infrastructure such as I-5 and also SR-14 and the BNSF Railway along the northern edge of the river also kind of separate these destinations and communities from one another. Next slide, please. So this image shows where the existing crossings are across I-5, connecting both sides. And some of the things to think about as we move forward is how can these existing connections be improved? Also, are there additional connections that may be needed? And for what modes do these need to be improved or increased for both pedestrians, bicycles, and automobiles? Next slide, please. And then transit connectivity. At the top of this image in orange, we see the existing and future Vine, Clark County, Vancouver BRT system. And at the bottom of this image, the yellow line denotes the Portland light rail line that ends currently at the Expo Center. And one of the parts of this project will be how do we fill the gap between those two systems. So in doing that, one of the questions to consider is how can transit best serve each of your communities as we move forward with this. Next slide, please. And then finally, there's the project kind of allows for some interesting landscape and placemaking opportunities. So where the bridge touches the river, the bridge, as we call them, the bridge heads, and the river's edges really create some opportunities for open space or access to the river. The land adjacent to the highway and the interchanges, as well as highway crossings and transit stations, can provide opportunities for public space or interaction. And so as you think about those, think about how these types of opportunities could also improve your community as well. Next slide, please. So now we'll zoom into some of the things we've heard on the Washington side. And this is just a cross-section of some of the things. One of them is improving the connectivity between downtown and Fort Vancouver. This is something we heard that was important. Also improving access to transit roadway, bikeways, and pedestrian connections or sidewalk connections across I-5. And then also improving connections to the growing waterfront of Vancouver. Next slide, please. And then on the Portland side, some of the things we've heard related to Hayden Island are extending Tomahawk Island Drive as Hayden Island's main street, connecting the east and west sides of the island, creating a transit station on Hayden Island that is also a center to the community. And on the landward side, improving Bridgeton accessibility, including access to Hayden Island. And then in general, we've also heard that public access to the river is important. Next slide, please. And so finally, I'd like to conclude with some other questions to consider as we move into the upcoming meetings. First of all, did we miss anything? Is there anything here you thought we missed from a community standpoint? And are there other issues that are specific to your community that we should be considering? And then, as you think about those things, can they be prioritized? Are there some that have higher priority to your community than others? And thinking beyond our project, do you know of other places or examples that do something well that you would like to see incorporated into this project? And then finally, what impacts does I-5 have on your community that could also be improved? Next slide, please. And then lastly, some transit-related questions when we move into the transit-focused meeting, which are what improvements would make transit better or more desirable to use for you and your community? What locations does the transit need to serve? Where would new transit station best serve your community? and what improvements to both the street network would make accessing a transit station both easier and safer for you and your community. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We're now going to take about 40 minutes and head into breakout rooms with your community working group facilitators and fellow participants. In the time with your small groups, you will have a program staff member lead you through individual introductions, talk a bit more about your group's upcoming meeting dates and topics, and you will have a few minutes for any questions or comments that you may have. So at this time, Andrew, do you want to give instructions about how folks find their appropriate breakout rooms?
Yes, for sure. So I'm going to open 4 breakout rooms, and it will pop up at the bottom of your screen. So please select the breakout room that relates to the community working group that you are participating in. And if you are having troubles getting in, please let us know. But I'm going to open them now. So it should pop up at the bottom, inviting you to join one of the 4 community working groups. And please feel free to message us in the chat or unmute and let us know if you are having difficulty.
Andrew, it's Gordon Matthews. During the interviews when we met with the representatives before, based on my experiences, there was a suggestion that it might be beneficial for me to participate in 2 of the breakout groups. Will there be an opportunity for sort of cross-pollination between these?
Yes,
as
for
we
sure.
report back and discuss? Okay, great.
Yeah.
I am not seeing where I can choose my breakout room.
Which I can add you to yours. Which one are you going to?
I'm going to the multimodal.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is the interpreter. I believe that David wants the interpreters and captioners in Vancouver.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise, this is Jordan Bold. I'm also don't have a button to click here, but I'm headed to downtown Vancouver as well.
Okay.
Hi, this is Shane Nels. I don't have a button to push either. I'm in the multimodal.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is Gordon again. I don't have a button. I need active transportation.
Thank you, Gordon.
Good afternoon. This is Eric Molander. Could you please add me to the Hayden Island Marine Drive?
Yes, thank you.
Hello,
this is Fred Jubitz. I wanted to be on the Hayden Island and Marine Drive interchange one.
Thank you, Fred.
Hi, Andrew. The button's not showing for me either, but if I could be added to active transportation, that would be appreciated.
You are good to go.
Hi, Roger Haslett here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Roger.
Hi, I'm supposed to be on the multimodal. I just got my computer to work. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just invited you. Marlon, are you trying to get into one of the community groups? Let's see, Marlon.
It sounds like your audio is not working. Can you add him to active transportation, please?
Thank you. And it looks like we have someone on the phone, phone number 3410. If you want to unmute yourself, I believe it's *6.
Thanks. I was having an issue with that. It's Jameson. I'm supposed to be in the multimodal group.
All right, we'll get you in there. Thanks.
We're good to go.
And then it looks like we have someone on an iPhone here. I think that might be Alejandro, but you're breaking up. Is that you, Alejandro?
This is Alejandro Arellano. Jennifer?
Yes, thank you. Okay, can we add Alejandro to the multimodal commuter group, please?
Yes, it's me.
Okay, you have been added to multimodal.
I thought I was on the transportation. Oh, okay. All right. No, that's fine. I have a really bad reception in this. So go ahead.
So he should see an option to go ahead and add himself to the group. Is that right?
Yes. So I have added you to multimodal computer and you commuter, sorry, and you should see an option on your phone to.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to put the slides back up while we're waiting.
Let's see. Hi, Alejandro, are you there? Alejandro, are you there?
Hello, Andrew. Could you
Hi,
put
Anita.
in the active transportation group? I
Okay.
feel like I'm popping in and out, but that's hard to be in two places at once.
Let's see. Okay, you should have it pop up.
Yeah.
Hi, Whitney.
Hello.
Which community group are you hoping to join?
Downtown.
Okay, I will get you added there.
Thanks.
Are we all back here? It looks like mostly. We'll wait just another 30 seconds or so. Great. Jennifer, do you want to put up our slide deck? Perfect. I believe that all of you reviewed your upcoming meeting dates and topics in your specific breakout rooms, but here you can see that information again. I will highlight for the Downtown Vancouver group that we have moved your first date, the first date that you originally saw, I believe it was the 17th or something like that, has been updated to the 29th. You do have this information reflected in the current agenda that you received, but I do want to call that out for your attention. Additionally, you can always find the upcoming meeting schedule on the website. We also have created a community working group webpage with information about this entire process. On there, it also lists the roster of participants that are on each community working group. Lastly, you can expect to get an email from the program info box at least a week prior to each of your meetings to remind you about the logistics around the upcoming meeting. Please do make sure that you are receiving those emails from the info at Interstate Bridge and that they're not being filtered into your spam. Next slide. Lastly, I'll just say thank you for the immense amount of information you let us share with you in a very short amount of time this evening. We commit that in future meetings, we will spend time listening to you, and I look forward to partnership in the program, and I wish you a good night.
Thank you.